I've always hated mirrors. It's a stupid fear, right? It's just glass. But I can't explain it. Every time I stand in front of one, I feel like something's watching me. Something I can't see. It's not the reflection. I mean, it's me. I know it's me. But it's the way the mirror feels. Like it's waiting for something. It's the way it waits for you to look into it, to study your face, as if it's examining you for something. Something you can't see. Something you might miss. I never thought much about it. I just learned to avoid it. If I passed a mirror, I'd glance at it and move quickly. The one in my hallway was the worst. It's a full-length, one of those antique ones, with the gold trim. Every time I passed it, it felt like the air got colder, like I could hear the glass humming, or sometimes whispering. Maybe I was just being paranoid, I told myself. After all, everyone has those irrational fears, right? It wasn't like I was the only one. But what happened to me last night? I can't explain it. I don't even know if it was real, but I can't stop thinking about it. It started with a phone call. I'd been working late, as usual. I wasn't expecting any calls, but when my phone rang, I picked it up without thinking. It was an unknown number, but something inside me told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, rubbing my eyes. The silence on the other end was thick, like something was listening. I waited, but nothing came through. Then I heard a soft voice, barely a whisper. "It's too late." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. That voice, it was my voice, but not quite. It was distorted, like someone was trying to sound like me, but failing. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe for a second. "Who is this?" My voice was shaky, and I instantly regretted asking. I didn't want to know. The voice responded, slower this time, a low murmur. "Look at the mirror." My stomach dropped. Something inside me turned cold, frozen. Look at the mirror? I didn't want to. I didn't even know why I was thinking about it. But that voice, it made me want to. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it knew something I didn't. Something that would happen if I didn't do what it said. I hung up the phone, but my hand still shook. I wanted to ignore it, just walk away, but my feet moved on their own. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of the mirror in the hallway, my reflection staring back at me. I paused. Something was wrong. The air around me had shifted. It was like the temperature had dropped, and the space felt off, like something was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off, but the longer I stared, the more I felt it. The reflection wasn't right. I don't know how to explain it. It looked like me, but it didn't. My face seemed a little too still, too vacant. My eyes, wide open, were locked onto my own. I could see my own expression, but somehow, it didn't feel like my face anymore. There was something in the eyes, something empty. And then the reflection did something that made my heart stop. It smiled. I didn't smile. I wasn't smiling. But it was smiling. A grin that stretched too wide, its lips curling back too far, revealing teeth too sharp, too many teeth. They didn't belong to me. My blood ran cold. I stepped back, blinking, as my own reflection jerked its head slightly, still grinning at me, like it was savoring my shock. That wasn't possible. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my skin felt clammy. I backed away from the mirror, but my reflection didn't move with me. It stayed there, staring at me with those two wide eyes. I stumbled backward, reaching for the wall to steady myself. And then, it did something even worse. It raised its hand. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a simple reflection. But no, its fingers, those wrong fingers, moved. I felt it in my chest, the sensation that it was reaching out. And when I looked again, its hand was pressed flat against the glass. I gasped, stumbling backward, my heart racing in my throat. It was as if it was trying to reach through the mirror, trying to get to me. I turned, ready to run, but something stopped me. The phone rang again. I grabbed it before I even thought. "Look again," the voice said. This time it was no longer just a whisper. It was firm, like an order, but still strangely familiar. My body wouldn't obey. I didn't want to go back to that mirror. Didn't want to see that thing, that other me standing there. But my feet moved toward it, slow, reluctant, like they were being pulled by strings. And when I reached the mirror, I had to look. I don't know why. I really don't. But when I looked, I felt my soul freeze. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was me, but not me. The thing in the mirror was wearing my face, my body, but its eyes were empty, hollow. I couldn't see anything behind them, like the lights had gone out. And that smile, the same twisted, broken grin, had stretched wider. It was mocking me. It was waiting for me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. It raised its hand again, reaching toward me, as if it were daring me to touch it. And then I saw it. Its fingers were sliding through the glass, slowly, as though the mirror was no longer a barrier. It didn't shatter. It just melted, like wax. Its fingers, thin and jagged, crawled through the surface one by one. And then its entire hand reached out, gripping the edge of the mirror. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare. The thing that was wearing my face spoke again. Its voice was my voice, but it was wrong, twisted, as if it had been pulled out from the deepest part of my own mind. "You can't leave," it whispered, its lips curling even more. "I'm already here." Suddenly the lights flickered, and the mirror, the reflection, wasn't me anymore. It was the thing from the other side. It was grinning wider now, the grin impossible, stretching across its face until it looked like its skin would split. I turned around, but my body stayed where it was. It was like I couldn't move. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. All I could hear was the thing behind me, its cold breath against my neck. "You'll never escape," it whispered right in my ear. "You'll never wake up." I tried to force my eyes open, to snap out of whatever was happening, but the mirror was still there, reflecting a version of me that wasn't me. I turned back to look at the mirror, and the thing, my reflection, was no longer standing still. It was stepping out, crawling through the glass with a speed that made my blood run cold. And then, it reached for me. I tried to move, to scream, to run, but it was too late. I remember the first time I heard about the Hinterkaifeck murders. It was just a rumor back then, whispered among the townsfolk. But even then, I knew there was something off about that place. Something dark. They say the quietest places hide the most terrifying secrets, and Hinterkaifeck was no exception. I never had the chance to meet the Gruber family, but I heard enough stories. The family lived on a farm far away from town, isolated in a way that made you feel uneasy just thinking about it. The farm was hidden in the heart of the forest, so far from any neighbors that you could almost believe it existed in another world. I'd heard people talk about the strange sounds coming from the farm, the odd behavior of the family, and the eerie stillness that seemed to cling to the place. But I never thought much of it. It was just small-town gossip, I assumed, until it wasn't. It happened in the spring of 1922, and I'll never forget the day I heard the news. The family had been gone for days. No one had seen them, and that was strange enough. But when the neighbors went to check on them, what they found was something I still can't fully comprehend. They found Andreas and Cecilia Gruber first. They'd been killed in their bed, bloodied and lifeless, their bodies violently struck with a farming tool, one of those mattocks. It was an awful sight, too awful for words. But that wasn't even the worst part. Victoria and her two children, Cecilia and Joseph, were found next, murdered in the same horrific way. It was clear that they had all been killed while they slept. A brutal attack in the dead of night, one after another. But what made my stomach churn with unease wasn't just the violence. It was the fact that no one had heard a thing. The farmhouse stood silent, as if nothing had happened. But here's where the story gets truly disturbing. The police found no sign of forced entry. The house had been locked up tight, with no evidence of a break-in. It was as though the killer had known the family well, perhaps even had a key to the house. But that wasn't the worst part. The murderer hadn't fled after the killings. Instead, they stayed. They lived in the house. For days after the murders, the killer, or killers, had remained in the very place where the Grubers had died. They ate their meals at the family's table, sitting in the very chairs where the victims had once sat. They stoked the fire in the hearth, as if nothing had happened, as if they were just another member of the family. I don't know what kind of person or thing could do that. The thought of someone living among the dead for days, it chills me to my core. The police were baffled. They scoured the area, looking for any clue that could lead them to the killer, but there was nothing. The farmhouse was locked, the windows were intact, and no one had seen anyone leave. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of the murderer. People began to speculate. Some said it was a stranger, a wandering traveler who had somehow slipped through the cracks. Others whispered that it was someone from the family, perhaps a relative, someone who knew the Grubers too well. But I wasn't so sure. You see, there was something strange about that farmhouse. Even before the murders, I had heard rumors. People talked about hearing odd sounds coming from the property, whispers in the wind, footsteps in the night. Some claimed to have seen shadows moving in the windows, shapes that weren't quite right. But no one had ever dared to go near it, at least not after the murders. After the police left, a few locals tried to go out there, hoping to find some clue that might solve the mystery. But they came back pale and shaken. They said the air around the farm was thick with an unnatural stillness. Some even said they heard faint footsteps in the house, even though no one was inside. Others reported seeing strange shadows flitting past the windows, figures that seemed to be watching them. They said it felt like something was still there, something waiting. I couldn't understand it. I didn't want to. But the more I heard, the more I felt drawn to the place, almost as if the farm were calling to me. So, one night, when the moon was full and the air was heavy with fog, I decided to go. I shouldn't have. The moment I stepped onto the land surrounding Hinterkaifeck, a chill ran down my spine. The trees seemed to whisper in the wind, their branches creaking like the bones of the long dead. The farmhouse loomed ahead, its silhouette dark against the moonlight, its windows empty and hollow. It looked so abandoned, but I could still feel something there, something lingering. It wasn't right. I walked up to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was old, the wood warped by years of weather. Hesitantly, I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the remnants of the Grubers' lives scattered around me. The furniture was overturned, and the once warm hearth was cold and dead. But as I stepped deeper into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The floor creaked beneath my feet. I froze. Was someone else here? I couldn't see anyone, but the silence seemed unnatural, too still. Then faintly I heard it. A whisper. No, a breath. As if someone was breathing just behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. The house was empty, or so I thought. But I swear I saw something then. A shadow in the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Just the same old decaying walls. Yet, as I looked around the room, I felt the unmistakable sense that I was being watched. I couldn't stay there any longer. My heart was racing, my breath shallow. I fled from the house, running back into the night. The further I got, the more I felt the weight lifting, but I could still hear it in my mind. The faint whispering, the sense of something still lingering at the farmhouse. I never went back after that night. No one did. The house was eventually torn down, the land abandoned, but the stories, the rumors, they never left. They still linger in the whispers of the old townsfolk, in the rustling leaves of the forest. And to this day, no one knows who killed the Gruber family or why, but one thing is certain: something evil happened at Hinterkaifeck, and it's still waiting.